The biting winds of late autumn swept through the narrow streets of Oradour-sur-Glane, carrying with them not just the scent of damp earth, but also the pervasive chill of fear. 9-year-old Elodie Dubois clutched her worn teddy bear tighter, its once soft fur now matted from countless nights of anxiety. The rhythmic clang of distant bells, usually a comforting sound, now seemed to toll with an ominous weight. The year was 1943, and the shadow of the Second World War had long since engulfed their small French village. Food was scarce, laughter was rarer, and the constant presence of German soldiers, their boots echoing on the cobblestones, was a grim reminder of their occupied reality. Elodie's world revolved around her mother, Marie, a woman whose resilience was as strong as the ancient oak trees in the village square, and the faded photograph of her father, Jean. A brave soldier he had left for the front lines years ago, a recipient of the Croix de Guerre, a medal for exceptional bravery. It was Elodie's most treasured possession, kept safe in a small wooden box beside her bed. Marie often spoke of Jean's courage, his unwavering spirit, and how he fought not just for France, but for the hope of a peaceful future for his family. These stories were Elodie's solace, a fragile shield against the harsh realities that pressed in. The war had stripped away so much, but it couldn't take their hope, nor the quiet dignity with which they faced each day. Yet a new unease had settled over Oradour. Rumors of increased partisan activity in the surrounding forests and the subsequent tightening of German patrols created an almost suffocating tension. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant sound a potential danger. Elodie felt it in the way her mother's hand lingered on her hair, in the hushed conversations among the adults, and in the way the villagers avoided eye contact with the passing soldiers. The air was thick with unspoken anxieties, a collective breath held tight, waiting for something, anything, to break the fragile calm. Remember to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. The following spring brought little relief. The fields outside Oradour-sur-Glane, usually vibrant with new growth, felt heavy under the oppressive sky. Elodie spent her days helping her mother in their small garden, the repetitive motion of weeding a small comfort against the gnawing uncertainty. One afternoon, a hush fell over the village. A group of villagers gathered in the square, their faces a mixture of fear and hushed excitement. News had arrived, whispered from mouth to mouth, of Allied paratroopers landing in the region, a sign that liberation might be closer than they dared to hope. Marie, usually stoic, allowed a flicker of hope to cross her face, a rare sight that brightened Elodie's own spirits. "Your father would be so proud, Elodie," she murmured, her eyes distant, as if seeing Jean amongst the approaching forces. The very idea of Allied soldiers, their uniforms different from the German ones, brought a surge of unfamiliar courage to Elodie. She imagined them as heroes from her mother's stories, strong and righteous, ready to sweep away the darkness. However, this glimmer of hope was shadowed by an increased German presence. Patrols became more frequent, more aggressive. The soldiers, once merely imposing, now seemed filled with a palpable anger, their searches more thorough, their questions sharper. The villagers learned to move with even greater caution, to keep their expressions neutral, and to speak only when absolutely necessary. Elodie observed it all with a child's keen perception, understanding intuitively that the arrival of the Allies, while promising freedom, also brought with it an immediate heightened danger. The delicate balance of their occupied life was now disrupted, and the air crackled with anticipation, a mix of desperate hope and profound dread. A week later, while foraging for berries in the edge of the dense forest surrounding Oradour, Elodie stumbled upon something that would irrevocably alter the course of her young life. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. She was careful, as her mother had taught her, to stick to the familiar paths, but a flash of unusual color caught her eye. Hidden beneath a thicket of ferns lay a man. He was young, his face smeared with dirt and exhaustion, his uniform unlike any she had seen. It was the uniform of an American lieutenant. His arm was badly injured, a makeshift bandage barely stemming the flow of blood. His eyes, though weary, held a spark of desperation. He mumbled something in a foreign tongue, a plea she didn't understand, but the raw need in his voice was universal. Fear momentarily gripped Elodie, an instinctive urge to flee. But then she remembered her father, his bravery and her mother's quiet strength. This man, so clearly in distress, was not an enemy. He was like the heroes in her stories, now vulnerable and in need of help. Overcoming her fear, Elodie approached cautiously. The Lieutenant Thomas Riley, tried to push himself up, groaning in pain. She saw a small, framed photo tucked into his pocket. A smiling woman, a child. It was a detail that instantly connected him to her own longing for family. She knew with a certainty that only a child possesses that she had to help him. The weight of his predicament, the danger it presented to her and her mother, was immense. But so too was the sudden, overwhelming urge to protect this man, a piece of the hope that had been whispered about in the village square. Elodie knew she couldn't leave Lieutenant Riley there. The forest was too dangerous, too close to German patrols. With a resolve that belied her years, she rushed back to their small cottage, her heart pounding against her ribs. She burst through the door, breathless, and recounted her discovery to her mother. Marie's face, usually so composed, paled as Elodie described the wounded American soldier. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Harboring an Allied soldier was an act of extreme defiance, punishable by death for the entire family, perhaps even the village. A silent battle raged in Marie's eyes, fear for her daughter, the immense risk, and then a flicker of something else. The same quiet courage Elodie had seen in her father's photograph. She looked at Elodie, at the unwavering determination in her young eyes, and saw a reflection of Jean's spirit. Marie made a swift, difficult decision. "We will help him," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "But we must be careful, Elodie, very, very careful." They gathered what little medical supplies they had, clean rags, some antiseptic from the dusty cabinet, and a small bottle of their precious schnapps for pain. They also packed a small amount of bread and cheese. As they prepared, the distant rumble of military vehicles grew louder, a chilling reminder of the ever-present danger. Elodie felt a knot of fear in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about helping a wounded man. It was about striking a small blow against the darkness that had enveloped their lives. A quiet act of defiance, born of compassion and hope. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more compelling, true-to-life narratives. Under the cloak of dusk, Marie and Elodie returned to the forest. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Carefully, they helped the injured Lieutenant Riley, supporting him as he limped back towards their cottage. Every shadow seemed to conceal a German soldier. Every snapping twig sounded like approaching footsteps. The journey was slow and agonizingly tense. Elodie, small but determined, helped steady the lieutenant, her small hand firm on his uninjured arm, providing a surprising amount of support. They managed to get him into their small, hidden cellar, a cramped space beneath the floorboards, usually used for storing preserves. Marie quickly tended to his wound, her movements precise and gentle, despite the lack of proper medical tools. The lieutenant, his face etched with pain, offered a grateful, albeit weak, smile. He introduced himself as Thomas, and through gestures and a few broken French words, he explained that his unit had been scattered after a botched reconnaissance mission. He was alone, deep behind enemy lines. Life with Thomas hidden in their cellar became a precarious ballet of secrecy. Elodie became his little guardian, bringing him small portions of food, water, and reading to him from her father's old, worn books, her voice a soft murmur in the oppressive silence of the cellar. She learned a few English words from him, and he, in turn, learned simple French phrases. Their bond grew, forged in the crucible of shared danger. The constant fear of discovery was a heavy burden, weighing on Marie's shoulders, but the quiet presence of Thomas, a living embodiment of the Allied hope, also brought a strange, fragile comfort to their lonely existence. Days turned into a week, each one filled with an unbearable tension. The German patrols in Oradour became increasingly frequent and aggressive. They conducted random house searches, their boots echoing ominously through the village streets. One morning a sharp knock rattled their cottage door. Marie froze, her face drained of colour. Elodie's heart hammered against her ribs. Two German soldiers stood on their doorstep, their faces grim, their rifles slung menacingly over their shoulders. They demanded to search the house, their voices sharp and guttural. Marie, with a calmness that belied her terror, invited them in. While one soldier began to methodically search the small living area, the other headed towards the kitchen, dangerously close to the cellar entrance concealed beneath a worn rug. Elodie, seeing the imminent danger, knew she had to act. Without thinking, she tripped, spilling a bucket of water she was carrying directly onto the soldier's boot. The sudden splash, followed by her tearful apologies, created a diversion. The soldier, momentarily flustered and annoyed, turned his attention to her, scolding her loudly. Marie quickly intervened, apologizing profusely and offering to clean his boot. The brief chaos bought them precious moments. The other soldier, growing impatient, decided the small cottage held nothing of interest. With a final glare they left, their heavy boots clanking down the path. Marie embraced Elodie, her hands trembling. It had been a terrifyingly close call, a stark reminder of the constant, deadly peril they faced. Their secret remained safe, but the incident left them shaken, reinforcing the fragile tightrope they walked. As autumn relinquished its grip, surrendering to the relentless advance of winter, the chill permeated deeper, not just through the thin cottage walls, but within the very souls of Marie and Elodie. Lieutenant Riley's gunshot wound, though no longer an open gash, was healing at a torturously slow pace. The constant low-grade fever that occasionally flushed his face and the persistent pain that made him wince with subtle movements were grim reminders of his fragile recovery. This drawn-out convalescence, coupled with their dwindling supplies, each crust of bread, each lump of sugar now a precious commodity, was taking a profound toll on everyone. The relentless uncertainty of the war, a suffocating blanket of dread, and the constant chilling threat of discovery by the German patrols weighed heavier than ever on Marie. Her face, once etched with a quiet, unyielding determination, now showed stark signs of profound exhaustion. Deep shadows bruised the skin beneath her eyes, and the delicate lines around her mouth seemed to deepen with every passing hour. She worried about every faint cough that escaped the cellar, convinced the sound would carry, every unexpected creak of the floorboards above them, every distant dog bark, became a potential harbinger of doom. Her sleep was fractured, haunted by nightmares of discovery and retribution. Elodie, too, felt the crushing burden of their shared secret. The weight of it pressed down on her small shoulders, eclipsing the simple joys of childhood that should have been hers. She longed for the freedom to play without the constant gnawing fear, to hear the carefree laughter of other children, now mostly absent from the village streets, replaced by hushed whispers and wary glances. Yet, despite the fear, the bond she had forged with Thomas was strong and undeniable, a silent understanding passing between them in glances and hushed tones. It was a bond forged not in childish games, but in the crucible of shared hardship and whispered hopes. He often spoke to her in soft murmurs, painting vivid pictures of his family back home, of the vibrant, towering city of New York. a world away from their isolated, war-torn existence. He spoke of the day he would return, of a future where children like her could play under a clear sky without the shadow of war. These fleeting conversations, while offering a glimmer of hope in their dark reality, also starkly emphasized the precariousness of their situation. Thomas was a living, breathing symbol of the liberation they yearned for, a promise of a better tomorrow. But his very presence, hidden beneath their floorboards, also represented an immense, deadly risk. The weight of that hope, coupled with the ever-present danger of discovery, became almost unbearable, a suffocating pressure. Marie often sat by the small, grimy window, her gaze lost in the desolate, winter-grey landscape outside, her thoughts a tangled, agonizing mess of fear and longing for a peaceful future that seemed increasingly distant, a mirage on the horizon. The village itself felt like a ticking clock, its silent rhythm accelerating with each passing day, and they were caught within its relentless, unforgiving pulse. If you're finding this story compelling, please subscribe and share with your friends. Your support helps us create more content like this. The cold, unforgiving winter tightened its grip, bringing with it a renewed escalation of hostilities that echoed through every corner of France. News, grim and terrifying, reached Oradour of increased German sweeps, not just random patrols, but a brutal, systematic crackdown on any suspected resistance activity. The air was thick with chilling tales of villages razed to the ground in reprisal, of civilians arrested in the dead of night, their fates unknown. It became agonizingly clear. The village was no longer safe. Thomas, though still not fully recovered from his injury, a dull ache often radiating from his arm, a lingering weakness in his gait, knew with a desperate clarity that he had to move. Staying meant certain death, not just for him, but for Marie and Elodie, who had risked everything for him. He had overheard hushed whispers from fleeting contacts, fragmented pieces of information about a resistance network operating further south, deeper into the French countryside, and he clung to the belief that he could reach them. The decision to leave was agonizing, a wrenching choice that tore at his conscience, knowing the risk he left them with. Their farewell, in the dim, suffocating light of the cellar, was quiet, filled with unshed tears and unspoken fears. Marie, despite the gnawing terror that twisted her stomach, moved with a surprising resolve, helping him prepare for his perilous journey. Her hands, though trembling slightly, meticulously packed a small bag with what little food they could spare. A few pieces of hard bread, a precious wedge of cheese, and a small flask of water. She added a few extra layers of clothing against the biting cold, and most importantly, a small worn map of the region that had belonged to her own father, its lines and symbols a silent testament to survival. The emotional toll of their impending separation was immense, a heavy grief that settled over them all. Elodie, sensing the profound finality of the moment, clung to Thomas, her small body trembling, a silent, desperate plea in her wide, tear-filled eyes. He was more than just a soldier to her. He had become a trusted confidant, a fleeting, flickering beacon of hope in their dark, isolated world. The thought of him leaving, venturing back into the vast, perilous unknown, into the very maw of the war, filled her with a profound, aching sadness. Just before the first sliver of dawn painted the eastern sky under the cover of a thick, swirling fog that clung to the ground, they cautiously opened the cellar door. The air was frigid, biting at their exposed skin, an icy harbinger of the danger that lay outside. As Thomas prepared to slip into the pre-dawn gloom, his face a grim mask of determination, Elodie, her small hand trembling violently, reached into the pocket of her worn dress. She pulled out the Croix de Guerre, her father's medal, its silver dulled with age and handling, but still radiating a quiet, unyielding strength, a tangible link to bravery and sacrifice. For courage, she whispered, her voice barely audible, pressing the cold metal into his calloused palm. "My father's." Thomas looked down at the medal, then up at the earnest, courageous child before him, tears welling in his eyes, hot against the cold air. He understood with a sudden, overwhelming clarity the immense sacrifice, the profound trust this small, selfless gesture represented. He nodded, a silent promise exchanged between them, a vow to carry her hope. He then saluted the brave little girl, a solemn, heartfelt gesture of respect from one soldier to another, from a man to a child who had taught him the true meaning of resilience. And then, with a final lingering glance that spoke volumes, he melted into the swirling mist, leaving behind an unbearable silence that stretched endlessly in the new day. The departure of Lieutenant Riley left an aching, cavernous void in the small, once bustling cottage. The silence of the cellar, which for weeks had been a comforting sign of their shared secret and tenuous safety, was now no longer that. Instead, it became a heavy, oppressive reminder of his absence and the terrifying, gnawing uncertainty of his fate. Marie and Elodie resumed their precarious existence, the daily rituals of survival continuing, but now with an added, suffocating layer of anxiety. Every passing day without news of him was a form of torture, each sunrise bringing a renewed sense of dread. The war, a monstrous, insatiable beast, continued its relentless march, its shadow stretching longer over Europe. The village of Oradour remained stubbornly under German occupation, the daily struggles for food and warmth compounding their worry for Thomas. Days bled into weeks, then into long, agonizing months. Spring eventually returned to Oradour, painting the fields outside with a deceptive, cruel beauty of green and blossoming life. But the air remained thick with tension, heavy with unspoken fears. The whispers of the Allied advance grew louder, more insistent, carried on the wind from other liberated towns, a distant symphony of hope. Yet so too did the tales of brutal German reprisals. Stories of entire villages razed to the ground in acts of sickening retribution, of civilians arrested en masse and disappearing without a trace, of the desperate, often suicidal acts of resistance fighters. Each of these harrowing stories sent a fresh, icy wave of fear through Marie's heart, a chilling reminder of the constant, ever-present danger that had been looming over them since Thomas's departure. Elodie, now almost 10 years old, watched her mother with a growing, quiet concern. Marie rarely smiled anymore. The bright spark in her eyes had dulled, replaced by a distant, vacant stare. Her movements, once brisk and purposeful, were now slow and deliberate, as if each step required immense effort. The hope that Thomas had brought, the fragile flame he had ignited, was now diluted by the relentless onslaught of fear and profound exhaustion. The Croix de Guerre, her father's medal now tucked safely back in Elodie's small wooden box, felt heavier, its smooth, cold metal a poignant reminder. Its symbolism was now a complex blend of her father's enduring bravery, a legacy of courage, and Thomas's uncertain fate, a desperate prayer for his survival. They prayed for his safe return, for the liberation of France from the brutal grip of occupation, and for an end to the brutal war that had stolen their innocence, their peace, and so much more. The waiting was the hardest part. A prolonged agony of desperate hope, battling overwhelming despair, punctuated by the grim daily realities of their occupied lives. One scorching, oppressive summer afternoon, when the air shimmered with heat and the villagers sought any sliver of shade, a new sound began to fill the sky. It wasn't the familiar, menacing drone of German bombers, but a deeper, more powerful roar of planes, a sound that was instantly, thrillingly different, exhilarating. It was the unmistakable roar of Allied aircraft, their formations streaking across the brilliant blue, a symbol of impending change. Soon after, the distant rumble of artillery grew louder, No longer the heavy, oppressive thud of occupation, but the triumphant, echoing sounds of an advancing front, a symphony of liberation. The villagers, cautious at first, their faces etched with years of ingrained fear, began to emerge from their homes, slowly, tentatively, their eyes blinking in the bright sunlight. Then, as the sounds intensified, their faces began to alight with a cautious, fragile hope, a glimmer that had been long suppressed. News spread like wildfire through the narrow streets. The Allies were pushing hard, liberating towns at a breathtaking pace, sweeping away the oppressors like dust. Days later, the momentous day finally arrived. The first Allied soldiers entered Oradour-sur-Glane. The tanks, massive and imposing, rumbled through the village square, not with the menacing ironclad presence of the Germans, but with the joyous cheers of liberation echoing from their open hatches. The streets, once silent, gripped by fear and shadowed by occupation, erupted in jubilant celebration. Villagers, young and old, poured out of their homes, waving hastily made French flags, their faces streaked with tears of pure, unadulterated relief and joy. Marie, her own tears streaming down her face, glistening in the sunlight, clung tightly to Elodie, the unimaginable weight of years of fear finally, profoundly lifting from her shoulders. The air was thick with shouts, laughter, and the cries of freedom. Amidst the chaos and overwhelming celebration, a dusty jeep pulled up in the square, its engine sputtering to a halt. A soldier disembarked, his uniform clean and pressed, his face no longer gaunt and haunted, but still bearing the indelible marks of hardship and survival. It was Lieutenant Thomas Riley, his eyes scanning the jubilant crowd, searching, until they landed on the familiar figures of Marie and Elodie. A broad, relieved smile spread across his face, erasing the lines of weariness. He walked towards them, his steps firm and purposeful. A beacon of hope returned. Elodie, her heart soaring like a bird released from a cage, ran to him, her small arms outstretched. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. She saw a familiar glint of gratitude and profound respect there, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey. He reached into his pocket, his hand steady, and pulled out a small, tarnished silver medal. Her father's Croix de Guerre. He placed it gently back into her trembling hand, its cool metal, a tangible connection to bravery and enduring hope. "You saved me, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion, almost breaking, his eyes conveying a depth of gratitude that words could never fully express. He then stood, facing Marie, his posture formal despite the emotion, and saluted, a profound, heartfelt gesture of respect for their incredible selfless bravery and sacrifice. The village was finally, gloriously free, and with its liberation, a new chapter of life, born from profound courage and a child's selfless act of compassion, had finally, miraculously begun. Thank you for watching this story. If you were moved by Elodie's courage and the resilience of the human spirit, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and realistic historical narratives. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to life.